going to talk about pure awareness, also minimal experiences, from a perspective that we've been working on in the last years, which is the algorithmic agent. And yeah, let's go to it. So pure awareness is a phenomenon that one can hear in many traditions, of course, under different names. And more recently, it has attracted scientific attention, especially in the context of minimal experiences, minimal phenomenal experiences. And this kind of resonates with us because I think there's an interest for consciousness science in these experiences, in the sense that they can tell us something about what are the core causal factors for consciousness, what is a minimal model of conscious experience. And of course, this is important for other reasons, like how we think about other beings with also, are they also conscious, or AI systems, for example, and how we guide our moral actions towards these beings. And then there's another side of it, which I think is also very interesting for many of us that are here, which is that these experiences are associated with liberation, openness, well-being in different traditions. And it might be modes of being that we want to cultivate, that we want to make accessible in our society. So I will start by introducing a bit the scientific framework we're working on. And from there, I think we'll be well equipped to go to understand pure awareness from a computational side. And I say computational because the backbone of our theories, this Kolmogorov theory of consciousness that was introduced by Julio, who's our we are working with in the last 4-7 years. And the purpose of this theory is to provide an understanding of consciousness and life using principles from algorithmic information theory. That's where the name Kolmogorov comes from. And the relationship with Kolmogorov complexity, if you're familiar with it, is that the theory proposes that there are things that we call agents that build and use compressive models of the world that can be understood as programs that compress data, external data in the world, for evolutionary success. So the idea of Kolmogorov complexity, which is the length of the shortest program that can explain a data set, is that agents are generating this type of reduced programs in order to make sense of reality because they have limited resources and to navigate the world and survive or reproduce. And the key hypothesis in this theory is that these models, the mathematical properties of these models, is what provide structure to experience. So there is like an isomorphism between the mathematical properties of the models and the structure of experience. So the theory provides a very nice link between first-person experience, phenomenology, and computation, which can be amenable to third-person investigation. The algorithmic agent is a crucial part of the theory, and we can see agents as information processing systems that model the world and that update their models of the world based on the comparison with external data, with environmental data, but also with internal data. And this schema is very similar to what you can find in predictive processing, for example. So you have a prediction error that is updating the model. Crucially here, the model update is done in a what's called k-optimal way, in a Kolmogorov optimal way. So it's trying to minimize the length of the program that would generate the data, which can be seen as a generalization of Bayesian optimization, for example. And a key part of the agent is the objective function, which ingests the model, the current state of the world, and outputs a value of valence, which kind of reflects how well the agent is doing in the world. Am I doing well in terms of homeostatic needs, reproduction, etc.? And this valence is what the planning part will use, the planning engine, to generate different counterfactual plans using the models that the agent has, counterfactual plans that can be selected for action in order to maximize this value of valence. So this model is heavily inspired by other artificial intelligence models, agent models, like in reinforcement learning, for example. And there are a lot of parallels with free energy and active inference. I wanted to mention this because there's a lot of literature on active inference, and it would be great if we can do the link with the empirical predictions and all the things we're proposing here and what people think more in terms sometimes of active inference, if there can be links in that sense. And the crucial difference, I will just point it out, I think, is that what in our agent model is the error, prediction error is separated from the valence, while in free energy, there's only one quantity to minimize, that it's doing the optimization, which is free energy here, or I called it error. So nice thing of the agent model is that we can see it as a dynamical system. In general, computation can be understood in terms of dynamics, and models are programs that are run and that generate dynamical states, for example, in the brain. And we can see attractors in a dynamical landscape as an embodiment of the modeling process. So attractors of the brain dynamics are collapsing the different brain states into single discrete entities. And this is what the agent uses to coarse-grained reality. So you need to, at the end, collapse into different values that are different from one another, instead of having a more continuous process of dynamics. And we can see in the brain connectivity, as measured, for example, by effective connectivity and so on, as the geometry of this dynamical landscape. And this is very interesting because it provides a link all the way from phenomenology to neurobiology. So there's a whole trajectory here, and Jakub will explain that this afternoon. So please go see him. I will end with something that for us has been very interesting, which is the parallel with some parts of Buddhist teachings that we can then use to explore pure awareness. So the agent's perception of things as things, in a way, as independent, solid things, is an outcome in the model of the whole modeling process. And this is related to the concept of fabrication. In Buddhism, the fact that we are perceiving reality conditioned by our different conceptualizations of reality, by our conditioning. And this perception of things as separate solid entities, so not seeing the impermanence, the emptiness of phenomena, originates suffering in Buddhism. So there's a kind of dual nature of this modeling process. It's at the same time the best tool for the agent to survive. So it reduces a lot of suffering in a way. It reduces what we could call the first arrow, but still is generating a lot of mental proliferation constructs. The agent is not, it's hard for the agent to see that this is a fabrication. And well, I put this figure here because, and I will use a similar thing throughout the presentation, so we can understand the degrees of fabrication as an increase in the modeling hierarchy. So from high level phenomena like narratives, stories, to concepts like trees, to low level phenomena like edges and shapes. And different traditions have proposed different techniques in order to defabricate experience and to expose this fact that experience may be a construction. So computationally, we can understand these techniques as disrupting the modeling engine, so reducing the involvement of higher level models and then going to lower and lower levels of the hierarchy. You can think in these terms for the jhanas, for example. In dynamical systems, we can understand this process of defabrication as a progressive flattening. Here, of course, is just a caricature of this because you would have different levels of the hierarchy, but we can see this as a progressive flattening of system attractors at different levels. This perspective will be particularly interesting for the jhanas, and I will show that later. And I think with all this, we are well equipped to go towards the fundamental part, which is the computational phenomenology of pure awareness. And our question was that how can we explain computationally this common phenomenology that Thomas is finding in the reports of the books? Because there is some diversity, but there seems to be some common characteristics. And our hypothesis, and what we have kind of entertained these last months, is that this phenomenology corresponds in many cases to the agent experiencing a model of his own modeling engine, its own modeling engine. And this can happen in isolation, and these are MPE states, or with other phenomenal content, this would be MPE modes. So what we think can happen is that through this process of defabrication that you can see here, this lack of substantial phenomenal content can lead the agent to recognize that all this is just part of a modeling process. The agent can experience a model of its own modeling engine. This, of course, will be interpreted in many different ways, depending on the tradition, but there's kind of a figure ground reversal where the modeling process that was always in the background of experience comes to the foreground and now is modeled and experienced. And yeah, so you could say that pure awareness or awareness was in the background, now awareness is everywhere, everything is made of awareness, has the same taste quality, etc. And again, so this can happen in isolation, like in deep meditative absorption, where this model is the only model running. And this, I think, is most interesting when we are searching minimal models of experience. And then it can also run alongside other content. This would correspond to, for example, non-dual awareness, where all the content is seen as part of just the modeling process. And in this sense, I don't think it's really so interesting for the part of minimal experience, although there are some nuances there. But I think it's very relevant as modes of being that we want to be cultivated in society, for example. So at this point, I think it's interesting to introduce this distinction between transparency and opacity, and because we can understand very well what's happening, especially in MPE modes with this. So phenomena are transparent where they're perceived as real by the agent as existing out there. This is a piano and it's there in reality. Or they can become opaque when they are seen as just mind constructions, not so real. We can call it de-reified. There's not a reification of this being a piano with inherent existence. So opaque also relates to the concept of emptiness in Buddhism. So you don't treat it as something with inherent existence, but you see that it's either mind dependent or just part of awareness, for example. So I'm going to use these two colors here to denote transparency and opacity. And of course, this can happen at different levels of the hierarchy. So you could be very well aware that your mental narratives are just a construction, but you still think there's something solid here, or there is energy all around. And at the end, I think in non-dual awareness, the agent will perceive all phenomenal content as opaque. So everything is seen as just part of this processing. And this will give phenomena a kind of virtual aspect. It's not so real. And in computational terms, we can understand this as a reduction in confidence in underlying models, and this will have some consequences for well-being as well, so we will see later. And so we think most of the phenomenology that was associated to pure awareness can be explained by this fact that that the agent is running a model of its own modeling process. So for example, this epistemic openness, or the knowing quality, the fact that there's an experience that there is only knowing, can be explained by the fact that all that can be known by the agent is inside the modeling engine. So the modeling engine is giving the capability to model the world, to know something, and this is related to the quality of boundlessness, because everything that can appear just appears in awareness. There are really no boundaries to the modeling engine, because all the experiences the agent can have are just part of these models. And at the same time, the self is also perceived as part of this modeling engine. So this explains that these selfless qualities, non-egoic qualities, indeed, the agent will tend to maybe change its unit of identification, not identifying so much with a particular model, but rather with the whole modeling process. And in some traditions, and this is kind of a transition to the last part of the talk, pure awareness might be used rather as a pointer instead of a metaphysical statement about the true nature of reality. And we had David giving a very interesting talk about Dzogchen and how they conceive about these differences in awareness, experience, etc. And indeed, this is related to more what we can call the direct path. So already in experience, one can see the fact that everything arises as part of this modeling process. So they're kind of targeting a more direct realization of this fact. And I think this fact that is given as a pointer instead of an ultimate understanding is important, because at the end, what the agent is experiencing is a model of the modeling engine, not the modeling engine itself. The modeling engine can only be known through its models. And I think there's a nice parallel here with the teachings on the inseparability of emptiness and form, awareness and its contents. So awareness can only be known through its contents. And there will be, though, a tendency to reify pure awareness, to take it as an ultimate understanding of reality. And what I'm trying to show here is that the phenomenon of pure awareness itself can be transparent, as in the left, or opaque. think there's an interesting relationship there with mortality denial. So the agent might tend to look for a stable unit of identification to avoid the fear of non-existence. And here's where I think the jhanas, cessation events, may be very interesting, because in a way they can be seen as a tool for the agent to recognize or to deepen the understanding of emptiness, recognizing pure awareness as also part of the modeling process or as also fabricated. And at the same time, they can uncover possibilities for minimal experiences, as I will try to explain now. So the jhanas are deep absorption states. We heard a bit about it the previous days, and we can see them as progressive stages of deconstruction of experience. So very interestingly, the phenomenology of the sixth jhana, which is the sphere of boundless consciousness, is already very close to what one can see in reports of pure awareness. And what's interesting is that this experience can also be defabricated. You can go deeper to even more defabricated jhanas. And at the end of this defabrication, what lies is a cessation event, so no consciousness. For me, this is very interesting, because it's kind of telling that at the end of the spectrum of defabrication is not that there is something pure and fabricated, is that there is really no experience, at least no report or memory formation. And from a dynamical angle, we can see this transition as a progressive flattening of the dynamical landscape, which I think in the last jhanas towards cessation can be even related to just neural timescales in the brain, memory formation. So the idea would be that in the last jhana, where it's kind of undecidable whether there is or not experience, and in cessation events, the dynamics don't collapse long enough to form memories. So the attractors are not deep enough to generate memories. And yeah, so from all this, I think what we can conclude is that at the end, minimal experiences and most reports of pure awareness, although they share this commonality that they entail the recognition of the modeling process, they might be rather a subset of phenomenal space at the end of the fabrication spectrum, close to cessation events, but not really unfabricated or unstructured in our lingo. There are still models running because there is still report and memory formation. This is a nice sentence from Robert Bia, who I think addresses this whole topic from the meditative and insight meditation perspective very nicely. The idea being that whenever anything is perceived, that perceiving involves fabrication. I will just end with some practical matters. So what does all this tell us in terms of ethics and empirical predictions? And as I said, non-dual awareness traditionally is associated with liberation from suffering or more openness to experience. And computationally, we can think that this virtuality of models out there, this reduced confidence in what's real or not, can lead to reduced valence magnitude in general, because the objective function will weight. This is related to predictive weighting precision weighting in predictive processing. So the objective function will weight its output based on the confidence it has in the model. So the efforts for planning will be reduced if this valence magnitude is reduced. This leads to equanimity, there will be less reactivity, and also flexibility in model selection. So the agent is more able to update its model more flexibly. But importantly, this is not adaptive by itself. So reduced confidence in your models is not necessarily leading to reduced suffering. The framing of this will be super important, because you have then experiences of depersonalization, derealization, dark night periods in meditation. And yeah, Viva has done a lot of work on this, on how we can think about the stages that lead to adaptive traits in an agent, being accompanied by things like psychotherapy or proper integration, a tradition, etc. And we can draw also some empirical predictions. We have laid out many of them in the paper, but I will just mention what I think is most interesting in this context, which is that the states that are close to unconsciousness, for example, through the jhanas or through psychedelics, we think may follow different routes in terms of entropy, which might be related with richness in content. So you can have either content overflow, which leads you to the loss of consciousness, or just a progressive decrease of entropy that leads you to unconsciousness too. And I think for the jhanas or meditation, it's particularly interesting to understand which way we're going there. And finally, since whole brain modeling is kind of our specialty at Neuroelectrics, I think the kind of they can provide a very useful tool to connect this whole framework with neurobiology. In particular, we have been working in the last years in a particular model that can reproduce oscillatory activity, very aligned with predictive processing. So you have alpha in deep layers carrying predictions from higher level, higher hierarchical levels, and you have gamma in superficial layers that carry the errors from lower level, from bottom up. And this model can be used then to generate predictions at the brain level, for example, for meditation. And we've done this recently for psychedelics in a paper, reproducing a bit this effect that in the EEG under psychedelics, you see a global decrease of alpha. So just to conclude with some take-home messages, the idea is that using this modeling framework, at least, we can understand experiences of pure awareness as the experience of the agent's experience of a model of its own modeling process. And in isolation, they seem to correspond to minimally structured experiences, probably not completely unstructured, and they can lie close to cessation events. Alongside other contents, as in non-dual awareness, they might lead to increased well-being, but here the context is crucial. And I wanted to say that the realization for the agent is that ultimately all these models are empty, all phenomena are empty, all these models are kind of limited, all the views it will adopt are limited. This includes also, of course, the whole model we've been presenting here. Just hope it can be at least helpful and useful for what comes next. And yeah, I wanted to thank the whole team here, just to point out that we all have very different metaphysical stances about reality. We're not all panpsychists or physicalists, and we still can make progress in this and come up with these nice ways to structure our experience. Thank you.